We're so grateful to Dr. Sandy Norman and Dr. Jane Day, two of our church members who are also accomplished university historians who agreed to share some knowledge about Machu Picchu and the Incan Empire. This is something that we look forward to, and part of a wider event that's going to include, for some of us, a tour of the Golden Empire of Peru at Boca Raton Museum of Art on Wednesday at 1 o'clock. We have a special tour, and then some of us will continue that day to a meal at Pucara, Peruvian restaurant. The tour at the exhibit at Boca Raton Museum of Art has several artifacts that have never gone outside of Peru prior to this exhibit. And Boca Raton is the first stop for this exhibit. Just curious, how many people have ever been to Machu Picchu? Do we have some? Okay, I'm raising my hand too, my wife. So wow, almost half the people here have been to Machu Picchu. So we're going to welcome any anecdotes, stories that you might want to share. Sandy and Jane have assured me that their presentations will, after their presentations, there will be plenty of time to share some anecdotes. I just want to show you two of those pieces there. Those are from our home, Irene and I. They are made out of the wool of alpaca, and they are dyed, as you can see, in beautiful, to create two beautiful images of a typical Peruvian village in Cusco, which is in the Andes Mountains, and it's at the base to which you get out eventually to Machu Picchu. When I say base, it's 8,000 feet above sea level, and then it goes up from there. So it is high in the Andes. And you'll also see there a little alpaca, which is kind of the designated mascot of Cusco, Machu Picchu, together with a little figurine of Jesus and the children in typical Peruvian garb, what they call the cholitos, the cholos. Those are the indigenous folk from the countryside in Peru. And Sandy is adding a beautiful book that some of us may get a chance to read. So without any further ado, I'm going to turn the floor over to Dr. Sandy Norman. I do want to let everybody know that this presentation is being recorded via Zoom. So be careful what you say.
Best behavior for all of us this morning. As somebody who teaches World Civ part of the time, I'm doing it this year, I always deal with cultures of the Americas and particularly South America. So what I want to do today is I'm doing the timeline of history. I'm just going to fill your head with dates and people and maps and things. Jane gets the fun part. She's got all the social stuff. She's got the architecture. She's got the people. She's got the religion. So once I filled her head with facts, she'll make it pretty and a lot more fun. But one of the things I want you to do is realize that a lot of what goes on here as we're looking at all this is elevation and geography. That as people move and people adapt to different geographic landscapes, and really our environment is what shapes us. How high are you living? How much oxygen can you absorb? What can you grow? What can you domesticate? How can you travel? How close are you to water? How close are you to mineral resources and all these kinds of things? When I first started teaching this class, we had a fixed date. 12,000 years ago, people crossed the Bering Strait Bridge, and that's just gone by the by. It keeps going back and back and back. And now we know they came from the west over the Bering Straits, but they also came from the east, working their way from Northern Europe to Iceland, to Greenland, and across, and some of those bodies that have been discovered in the eastern part of Canada date back 25,000 years. Now there's evidence that there may have been some travel across the Pacific as well, coming in further down into South America. So the one joy, everybody keeps thinking, well, events happen, history is history, but history keeps changing. And this is why I keep the job, because it's changing and new things keep coming out. So here's some of these various early migration routes that give you a sense of how people traveled, how people operated. And I'm going to talk fast because I want Jane to take most of the time. And I'm just going to destroy this thing without making it. So these first people are all Paleo-Indian hunters. They're hunter-gatherer groups. They're not farming. They're not domesticating animals. They're just in small bands, usually of 20 to 25 people is about all that can sustain a group. You're gathering what you can gather in season that's ripe, and you're killing what you can kill. And eating what you can eat. And it takes thousands of years to spread. If we go back to the old theory of the Bering Straits, it takes 1,000 years to get all the way down because it's just smaller groups coming and moving very slowly. But I love this piece to use with my students because this is a spear point right here, stuck between the ribs of a kiln. It's about 14,000 years old. And when it was excavated, they went down, they found bones, the rest of the body they found butchered out. But these two ribs had the spear point in it that shows you the activity and the ability. You have to remember, no metal tools in the Americas, north or south, until the arrival of the Europeans, Raymond. No horses, no wheel, no domesticated animals except for in Peru, which is great. So this wonderful period we call the Pleistocene overkill is a period when the ice shield has come down. We've got mammoth, we've got mastodon, we've got the big cats, you know, used to be called the saber-toothed tiger. They don't use that term anymore, but still, it's a great term. And they ate the cat ate people, people ate mastodon and mammoth. And again, they're using spears with flint points on them. And we've got animals here who have never seen people. So with this period of Pleistocene overkill is when all of these animals disappear. And originally everybody said, oh, great hunters that came in that killed everything. But it's at the same time that the ice age ends and the ice begins to retreat, the vegetation changes, and a lot of these big animals that rely on the vegetation that grows right at the base of the ice shield are moving north, 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 but they're not finding enough food. So it's a combination of environmental change and probably a few hunters and gatherers, but it's a big country, very few people, lots of big animals, but they all disappear. So you have to adapt. And one of the ways you adapt is by keeping moving south and looking for climates, looking for spots, people spreading out, and finding points where they can settle. Finding points where they're going to find wild grains, wild berries, wild nuts. They're going to adapt to smaller game, to deer, to rabbit, to squirrel. South Georgia, the possum. And find all these foods. And if you're by water, you've got oysters and fish and other kinds of things that you're adapting to as you move along. So how does our body change as we move? How does our body change with a different diet? The diet of the indigenous people who become the peoples of the Northwest of the United States and Canada now relied heavily on a salmon diet and walrus and whale. And they have a different body structure than, say, the people in the Pueblos. And then if you move further south, elevation plays a role, food plays a role. So we find different heights, we find different builds, we find different body structures as we adapt to these different areas. So this is the area we're talking about, this western strip down South America, which now includes a lot of other countries rather than just Peru. And what I want to run you through is in a very short period, we've got state building collapse, state building collapse, state building collapse, state building collapse, state building collapse. And as each one collapses and the new one comes along, they absorb from the earlier state. So we're going to find certain elements just build, build, build until we get to the last of these groups, the Inca, who have an incredibly short period of time to do what they're able to do. But they do it by absorbing from all of the groups before them. So here's our timeline. 15 to 10,000 BC, see we're starting to move little bands moving in, groups of 25, 30. 8,000 land bridge closes. And by 3000 BC, the alpaca and the llama are domesticated. Dog will ultimately be domesticated as well, but nothing else. We have no cattle. We don't have chickens and roosters and horses and all those other good things. So, and the llama and the alpaca are only in this mountain range, up in this high land, not down low. So we're beginning in that 3000 BC, which is not that long ago, to start developing our complex cultures, our complex societies. People are coming together by domestication. We have a steady source of protein. And now we can start devoting ourselves to some of the other activities we need. We've got early farming communities. By 2500 BC, squash, gourds, and chilies are domesticated. What does it mean to domesticate a plant? It means you plant something, you save the seeds, you eat, and the next year you plant more. And gradually over time, those plants actually become dependent on you to keep that process of gathering seeds and replanting. And then you can move. You can take those seeds with you. Oh, we're tired of this place, or we've got too many fleas, we've got too many roaches, burn it down, let's move 15 miles down the road, and we'll plant. We're taking our seeds with us. We're taking our domesticated animals with us as we go. And they're beginning to domesticate cotton. Cotton is important not only in South America, it's important in the Pueblo district, the Four Corners districts. One of the things Columbus was given when he arrived in 1492 was cotton in Bahamas. Well, not fully developed, not the way we're going to see here. So this is a piece of 2,500-year-old cotton cloth that is in one of the museums that came out of one of the archaeological sites to show that it's crude, it's not dyed, but it's a start. And cotton versus skins of animals. And let me tell you, as someone who spins and teaches spinning, if you can spin cotton, you can spin anything in the world. It's probably the hardest fiber there is to spin. So the fact that they were beginning to spin it and beginning to weave it is rather remarkable. So look at all of these places. You can see Hucapuita here and others up in here and right down on the coast. So they're getting fish, they're getting ocean stuff. But you can see it's moving right up into the hills. This is from one of the archaeology things. So like also about 2000, the doctors, the medicine men in these tribes have figured out how to tree paint, which is to take a sharp object. Who wasn't who had the necklace that has this blade on the end? It could be silver, it could be gold, but probably with stone. And you begin scraping at the skull. You remove part of the skin, you scrape at the skull until you put a hole in it. And people volunteer for this. But if you've had a blow to the head, or you've had a major concussion, and you've had a blood build up underneath your skull, this is a way of relieving pressure, and people survive. Because enough of the skeletal remains that they have found have shown the tree painting, but also showed that it happened at a much younger age and the person died much older. So by about 2000 BC, they got this pretty figured out. And are beginning to do this. And you can see here they're talking about flint versus obsidian. And so we've got all of these states right down in here that I'm going to talk about rapidly. Chaban, Mocha, Chilu, and all of the others that I want to just fly us through. Chaban becomes a center by 900. You notice we've jumped ahead rapidly. There's long periods and then periods of boom, 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 boom that are going to be developing. They're using the large block architecture. Every time we think about Machu Picchu or Cusco, you're thinking that big, huge architecture. The Incas are getting it from these people. The Incas are taking a lot of the stuff they're doing from the people who preceded them. Isn't that gorgeous? Cotton and bipinal wool, they're dyeing now. They're spinning it, they're dyeing it, and they're weaving it. And doing all this work to create these glorious pieces. Can't leave out the lines. about 200 BC. Has anyone been out to the desert area and seen these? Not yet. I mean, I guess the best way to see them is to fly over them and see them. And they say they can see them from the space station when they fly over by focusing down on them. And then we get to remote culture. This is the predominance of what you're going to see in the exhibit when you get there. Is their pottery. This is the, and I didn't put in any of the sexually explicit pottery today. You'll find that yourself. It's in a separate room. And we'll be taking names. All of these are designed for two purposes. One is to tell the religious heritage and stories of the people in the culture. And I'm not going to tell you those stories because they're in the museum. And if you haven't been yet, this is one of the most brilliantly produced exhibits you'll ever see. Their use of social media, their use of visuals and things. They take things like this piece here and they'll blow it up and put it on the wall. And as they tell you the story, they'll light up pieces of it. And yes, you can take photographs inside as long as you don't use a flash. So this is probably the most sophisticated pottery you will ever see in your life from this period in time. It's comparable to seeing the Greek vases from the same period in another part of the world. And then, of course, we get the development, probably the most important thing, by 200, the domestication of the potato. The potato in Peru is different than russet. By far and by all the bars, but you can see different colors, different shapes, different styles, but an incredible source of food. You mix this with the beans and the gourds and the other stuff they've gotten, and you really have a great diet. Now, around Lake Titicaca, you touching on it? You're touching on it, so I won't too much. But we find a new group comes in, and again, it's one of those quick successor states. A group of people settle in, they find a spot that nobody's occupied, they build a little state, they take over a couple of little states, and they wait for the next state to come along. It just boom, boom, boom. This is from the exhibit. Everybody immediately thinks that the Inca developed this form of writing. And it doesn't. It's the Moire culture that precedes them about 700 AD. And these are used basically for numbers. Figuring out population count. How many people live in this district? They're going to owe us tribute. How much is trade going to bring in? What's the taxes on this trade? And as you study it, where the nods are, it's all, and what's miracle, it's all in decimal 10, which is wonderful for us. But you can then read that count out. It's not like sending a letter from Elizabeth to Mary in England, you know, or something like that. This is bureaucratic number, but done in an absolutely beautiful way. Okay, so the Incas finally arrived about the year 1000. They developed at the south end of Peru as a very small group, believing that they're part of the faith of the sun god, that they've become created peoples. And all these caves and everything, and again, it's just so brilliantly done in the museum. And they began a movement. And they moved up into the valley near what will become Cusco. And I misspelled Cusco on that slide. And again, not until 1200. 300 years to go. So it grows real big, between 1450 and 1500. Massive architecture. Jane will show you pictures. The divinity is the great golden disc of the sun. I put in here a bit. You guys probably don't play the video game Age of Empire, but you might have kids or grandkids who do. And if you do, ask them if they play it, because this god is one of the major games. When you play it, if you go into the Inca area, it's all about him. And then they expand and they put another capital in Quito. So Machu Picchu was built. We've got children that are selected to serve the state. 25,000 1,000 miles of roads and bridges to link everything for administrative purposes, for governmental purposes, for trading purposes, for the llama caravans. I regret that I haven't been there to see a llama caravan because it was so exciting in India to see camel caravans on the roads when you were traveling. What I found fascinating is there really isn't a lot of human sacrifice. You're going to see so much about human sacrifice when we get into the museum, right? There's really great stuff about how and why and great illustrations. But mostly it was sacrificing llama. Jane has stories. So here's a map showing the routes and the roads. And you notice there's always roads that go down to the coast. So we gotta go down to the coast because we've got different kinds of things down there that we want to trade. And here's, this is your test. Push one end, and we're gonna put a really nice Oreo at the other end, and who's the first one to get across gets to eat it to show you the way of traveling. And these are some fairly recent pictures. But you can see they, just like the Romans believed in building good roads, going everywhere they wanted to go. This isn't dirt tracks that wash out in a winter storm or in a spring storm. These are huge slabs of stone that are laid end to end to end to lead you across the countryside. And here you can see the switchbacks, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. So, that was the Inca. This is the end. Before the Spanish ever arrived in Peru, disease has arrived. Smallpox gets there first, because smallpox gets in among the natives who are trading and moving all over the place. Smallpox has been introduced into Mexico. Smallpox has been introduced into all the Caribbean islands. Smallpox is introduced into the coast, gets in amongst the traders, comes up, and the emperor is killed by smallpox. The population is decimated and weakened, which is going to help explain how and why the Spanish are so successful when they come. These people have never seen a Westerner, but the disease is there first. It's just like in colonial America, Native Americans always knew that the Europeans were on their way when the honeybee would arrive. Because the honeybee, the hive would divide, and honeybee was introduced from Europe. The hive would divide and a queen would separate and take off and go. And usually they would be about a year ahead of European settlers. So they all knew, oh no, here they come. Bizarro has only 168 men and about 30 horses. He arrives and captures, in fact, tomorrow is the anniversary of the capture of the Emperor of Inca. He said, I'll give you this room full of gold. Room full of gold if you let me go. The old Spanish take the gold and then execute it. They captured Sat Cusco. There's a little resistance fighting that goes on for a year or two. And then in 1537, the Spanish are completely successful. All resistance is done. And that's it. The Spanish are never taken to Machu Picchu. They never find Machu Picchu. In another map showing the expanse. And they were the last original unique civilization that develops in that area before European invasion and destruction of all of these groups. And it's very short. The Spanish brought ruthlessness with them, a desire for power, a desire for goods. They also brought metal weapons. They brought horses. They brought hunting dogs. They brought weapons made out of metal. And they're attacking people who have been weakened by European diseases. So it's, you look at this and you say, this is a huge piece of land. This is a huge population. These people are good and successful fighters because they have conquered all this territory. And they're decimated by the Spanish in just a couple of years because because of technology and disease. So what do we take about it? The Inca abandoned Machu Picchu really quickly. I mean, there's still a lot of Inca surviving to this day. And they abandoned Machu Picchu because to them it's sacred space. And if they continue to use it, the Spanish are going to find it. So they would rather kind of close up the roads, let the jungle come back, and let the earth and the gods in the earth take the space back rather than allowing the Spanish to take it. And it's about 400 years. Hiram Bingham gets there on July 24th in 1911. He was an archaeologist with National Geographic. He's a Yale graduate. He gains trust. He is taken up there, and that's that. And a big part of this story, when you read it, and I'll let everybody take a look. This is the book that accompanies the exhibit. Don't need to get it, but I buy all the books. The big part of the story is how much of the material that you're going to see, particularly the gold, was taken by Bingham and others to both the National Geographic headquarters in Washington, D.C. and the Incas, and then was hidden away. And when the Peruvian government began the fight, they said, no, it's ours. It's ours. No, we don't have it. Oh, where could it go? Actually, the National Geographic had already repatriated. Yale put up a fight and said, well, what are you going to do about it? And they took it to the UN and shamed them. And almost about 100 countries came on and said, there will be no Yale archaeologists coming to our country. There will be no Yale historians coming to study in our country. There will be no exchange of students. You will close down. And all of a sudden, Yale said, oh, look what we found in the basement. Oh, this incredible gold. Let's send it back to you. And so it goes back, and now it's back again at this terrific exhibit. So that's my part. I talk really, really fast, just the way I do in class. So I'm going to give this over to Jane. Brian's we'll do questions at the end.
Yeah.
Jane actually has to go give another talk, believe it or not. Yeah, send that. Yeah. Oh, yes. Well, we probably don't want it as much as I do.
Hi, everybody.
Hi.
First of all, I'm not a professor at FAU. I'm an independent scholar, but I did get my PhD at FAU, and so I know a lot of people, particularly in the history department. My expertise is not Peru, and unlike Sandy Norman, I don't teach world civ. So I'm taking a different approach to this. My expertise is historic preservation and local historic preservation, based around Palm Beach County, down to the Keys, places like that. I have been to Peru. I took my whole family there in 2018, and most of the pictures you're going to see are mine. There are a couple that aren't. But my talk is called Weaving the Fabric of Modern Peru, a Tourist Perspective. And I think one of the things that we need to think about is that a tourist is a kind of pilgrim. They're seeking authenticity in other times and other places, away from everyday life. So that's what we do when we go someplace on a trip. We plan, we anticipate, and then we bring whatever knowledge and bias we might have with us when we travel. This is one of the early shrines in Lima. It's in the Moire district. It's about 10,000 years old. It's called the Hara Pailana Shrine. It's made of adobe brick, and it was a large administrative center. There were human sacrifices at this site. It's mostly women and children who were sacrificed. And the Wari that Sandy talked about took over this place around the 16th century. Now it's a restaurant. That's how I got there. This is what you see out the window. This is Moire. It's an Inca crop laboratory. It's about 11,500 feet above sea level. It's higher than Cusco. And the tiers that are around this experience different temperatures due to varying levels of the sun, the shade, and the elevation. The largest of these, there are more than one, is 148 feet deep. They're retaining walls filled with soil. Some of the soil has brought in from different areas of Peru. And the high terraces that have been examined by archaeologists show that there are traces of 250 cereals and vegetables that were being grown at this place. Once the Inca take over such a large area of Peru, they have to feed the population and they have large warehouses. This is one of the farming methods they use, and all of this was watered by a complex irrigation system. It also had salt. And this is the Salina de Maris, it's a salt mine. It dates back to the Inca as well. Salty water was coming out of the earth at this spot, and it was channeled into 3,000 man-made open wells. Those wells evaporate, the salt is left, and the local people then gathered the salt. And I brought this picture particularly because you can see the bundles of salt that are on the side of some of the wells, that's what they do every day. We bought some of it has other herbs and things in it. My son-in-law took my jar at home because he had used all of his in Nashville and he liked it so much. This is one slide that's not mine. This is an aerial view of Cusco. The elevation is 11,200 feet and the population in 2017 was 428,450 people. It was the capital of the Inca Empire from the 12th through the 16th century, and it was elected as a World Heritage Site in 1983. The Constitution of Peru designates it as a historical capital of Peru until 1532. So it's recognized within the Constitution of Peru, and it's a very important, plus a lovely and important historical city. As Sandy talked about, the Inca were weakened by disease, but they were also weakened by a civil war that was going on when the Spanish arrived, with some of them families fighting the other families, and like Sandy elaborated, they lost to the armed forces and some superior military technology. But they left behind this marvelous city, and people still visit it today for many reasons. You see, this is the Plaza Moire in the city, and if you can see on the far side, and we'll see a close-up in a minute, is the Cathedral at Cusco. This is the 12 angled stones and the Great Inca. I was lucky enough, my niece is a travel agent, and she said, do you want to have a scavenger hunt in Cusco for your kids? Because I took my whole family. And the Great Inca showed up and showed the children the city. So when we got to the 12 angles, he taught them how to count to 12 in Quiche so that they would take something from the indigenous culture. And he was pretty great, and it was fun to tour the city with him. This is the Cathedral at Cusco. It began in 1560, but took almost 100 years to complete. It's built on top of one of the palaces of one of the Inca rulers. And the Spanish do this in many places. They take something that's important to the indigenous people and they put their important buildings right on top of it. So that's where they built the cathedral. It's in Spanish, Baroque style, colonial Baroque. It has 2 bell towers and a very ornate entrance. But that entrance is only opened on special feast days. And now you go into it on a side entrance, but it's a beautiful building. And then I love the Last Suppers. This is not the only one. This is the one in Cusco, but there are also another couple of them in Lima. This one's by Marcos Zapata of the Cusco School. It was done in 1753. They're eating a guinea pig. They're drinking corned beer from Inca cups. So that they've taken the story of the Passion and the Last Supper and put it into a context that would be understood by the people that are looking at the artwork. One of the things that I said in Bible study this last Thursday was most of the indigenous people who are looking at this in the 18th century don't read and write, but they see something familiar within the painting that relates to how they live. Guinea pig is not something that I liked, although my children did order, and it's a delicacy in Peru. This is the Convent of Santo Domingo, and it was built on the foundation of the Golden Palace, the most important sanctuary in Cusco when the Spanish arrived. This is a place that's on the interior of it, which is now a museum, that shows what the Spanish did to that beautiful interlocking stone construction. They painted it, they Europeanized it, they made it go with their colonial aesthetic instead of realizing the aesthetic of the indigenous people that were there. And this is a photograph from inside that old Santo Domingo, Convent of Santo Domingo, looking out into the garden. One of the Spanish chroniclers wrote that in front of the temple, the garden had, quote, golden plants with leaves of beaten gold, stems of silver, solid gold corn cobs, and 20 life-size llamas and their herders, all in solid gold. The Spanish were intrigued and they took all of it.
Yeah.
But while Cusco was the important capital of the Inca, it's up in the mountains. Like Sandy talked about, Bizarro needs to get to the coast. So he's moving the capital to Lima. This is Ileana, one of our guides, and she's showing us a drawing of what Lima looked like before the Conquistadores arrived. So there was a city there. The indigenous people did have temples and a plaza. The Spanish build on top of it. They leave the open space of the plaza and they build around it with their colonial architecture. This is their cathedral in Lima. It's in the Plaza Mayor. Its construction began in 1535, and Bizarro is said to have carried the first log into the construction site. That's probably a myth, but that's one of the things that they tell you when you visit. It was not finished, however, right away because of lack of funds, and there was also earthquake damage on 3 different occasions. This building was last rebuilt in 1940, and again, it has the twin towers that are so particular to this Spanish colonial architecture. Next door to it is the Bishop's Palace. This particular building was reconstructed in 1924, but I point out to you the wooden balconies that are cantilevered over the street. These are Moorish style balconies. It's incredibly beautiful. It's very Baroque in style. And Baroque, I mean, it's very ornate with lots of decoration on it, but it shows you that those kind of balconies weren't indigenous to Spain either. They had gotten that from Northern Africa when the Moors came up there. So we have places that is culture building on culture, taking it across the ocean and putting it in a new city. And here's the inside of that cathedral. It's kind of ironic. You have all this beautiful gold at the altar, but you also have the conquistadors and the conquering of the local people that are celebrated within the church. This is the tomb of Francisco Bizarro. Now, Bizarro was not a wealthy man. He was born in Spain. His mother was not married to his father. There was no money to inherit. He goes first to Panama. where he lives in Panama for a while. He tries twice before to get to Peru and he doesn't make it. And finally he says, oh, let me go one more time. And they let him go one more time to get to Peru because they heard these stories of the wealth. And he finally makes it to Peru, and the rest, as they say, is history. Bizarro was assassinated on June 26, 1541. 20 armed men of his rival Spanish supporters, Diego de Amiado II, entered his palace and killed him. The body was at first buried in the courtyard of the cathedral in two parts. I don't know why they did it in that, but the head and the torso. The torso was interred in this monument. They dug it up and interred it in this monument, which is just to the right of the front door as you enter the cathedral, in 1892 to celebrate Columbus's arrival within the North American continent. Later, in 1977, they found the head. It was in a lead niche. And then in 1990, they did DNA studies on it and they found out the body wasn't Bizarro's at all. The head was his, but the body was not. The tomb is still there. Another beautiful site in Lima is the San Francisco Monastery. In 1535, Charles I, who was the Holy Roman Emperor in Europe, ordered Bizarro to build a church and a convent for the Franciscans. It's the largest complex of this type in the New World. The original mud brick structure was built in 1557, but was destroyed. Why? An earthquake in 1656. So you can see that earthquakes are a common feature in parts of Peru and something to be worried about. The reconstruction of this building was completed in 1672. The entrance portal that you see in the middle, that's the brown colored entrance, and the lateral portal on the other side are made of stone. But the rest of the church was built of something called quincha, a mix of rushes, mud, and plaster, which is thought to be earthquake proof. And this is one of the best examples of 17th century Spanish Baroque in Peru. And because this is the church where the Spanish viceroy, who was the local ruler set up by Spain, worshipped, the church was gifted with lots of gold and silver from the colonial mines. The interior tiles were imported from Spain, as was much of the other decor. Here's the beautiful cloister that's in the center of the monastery. If you look at Mediterranean revival architecture locally, and in Palm Beach in particular, you see lots of cloisters around in the middle of these beautiful old houses. It brings the outdoors in and allows people to wander out of the rain and get from place to place and still have outdoor space that's protected from the outside world. This is a painting that's inside that cloister of the Franciscans, protected under the cloak of the Virgin. Notice the ceiling. It's called machambrado. It's mahogany pieces of wood fit together without nails, and it's quite beautiful. So the best technology and workmanship was used on this church. Underneath are the catacombs. The church is built over a network of underground tunnels used as catacombs to bury the dead, and it's estimated that there are about 70,000 burials at this site. The oldest house, now some of my things said in South American continent, I don't know if that's true, because as historians, we don't like to say the oldest because somebody will prove me wrong, but this is called Casa De Amiado. It's on land that was given by Bizarro to his lieutenant, Geronimo de Amiado, and it's been owned by the same family for 17 generations. It's all intact. There are 66 rooms, and a few of them are open to the public. It's right off the Plaza Moire, but you wouldn't know it from the street how beautiful it is inside. But it's a beautiful place and worth seeing. It's a portrait of Geronimo above the fireplace, and his sword is in the case over to the right-hand side of this picture. But imagine that, 17 generations of the same family. Here's another room of that beautiful house in downtown Lima. And one of my favorite spots in the house is the private chapel that this family worshipped in. All this while they're suppressing the native peoples and destroying what was there ahead of time. And yes, that's what they were doing. As Sandy said, Machu Picchu was never lost by the regular people, the people that lived there. But it was rediscovered by Hiram Bingham from Yale, and he located the ruin again in 1911. I think one of the things that amazed me, and some of you who have been to Machu Picchu will realize, is it's a much larger site than you think of. This is the picture that most people show, but it's really a huge city. There was discussion in our group about, was it a school? Was it for astronomers? Was it a place of retreat for the wealthy? It's not known for sure. And my children were thinking about, was it a school for people that would learn about astronomy? Said, oh, it's like Hogwarts. They were just young enough at the time that they were still thinking of Harry Potter. Yeah. This is the Temple of the Sun at Machu Picchu, and it's thought to be one of the most important buildings on the site because of the curved wall. You can see the stone base, and the blocks on top of it were carved so that they fit in this curved pattern. And it's set up in such a way so that on the sun's rays at the winter solstice will go through the window in this and hit the central stone in the middle of the building. Below it is a royal tomb under the Temple of the Sun. The steps represent the different levels in the Inca world. The snake is the underworld, the puma is the present, and the condor is the celestial world. The tomb of the condor is this part of Machu Picchu. I don't remember ever seeing this before I went there, but it's a really beautiful spot. And as you see, the stone walls of this tomb go up like the wings of the bird, and then the head and the neck of the condor are in the front, carved on the floor, and this they thought acted as an altar. They have found mummies at this particular place in Machu Picchu, but there were also little cells that were there. Bingham thought that they were jails, but it really isn't known what those were used for. And so there's a lot more to know as we study it and go forward. This is the one of the central plazas, and again, see the beautiful stonework. The Inca are known for their stonework. All these blocks that are cut to fit together. And this particular picture I took not only to show the stonework, but the views as you look out on different sites. You see the ruins of different buildings below, and you see the whole thing is ringed by mountains and clouds, and it's a beautiful natural site, as well as being an important historical place. Lake Titicaca at 12,500 feet above sea level is the highest lake in size in the world. It covers 3,210 square miles, about 120 miles long and 50 miles wide. Bolivia is on the other side of the lake. It's beautiful. It's hard to get to. You have to fly up there, or we flew up there. And the air is thin, but it's worth a visit. The lake is filled with different islands with different cultures in it. This is from Isla Uros. They developed floating islands a century ago to escape the foreign invaders. They didn't want to be captured by the Spaniards. So they went to Lake Titicaca, they went up in altitude. They have about 40 islands, and they consider themselves to be the oldest people on Earth. They believe they were born before the sun and describe their way of life as living between water and heaven. They speak Amara, they don't speak Quechua, and the reeds that this man is holding, that's the tool with a knife slashed on the top of his pole. That's how he cuts the reeds, and then he harvests them and uses them to build the islands, the boats. They also use them for food, firewood. And here's what it looks like on one of the islands, the island that we visited, and the boats that they make out of these reeds. One of the things I want you to look at in this picture is that there are solar panels on this island that brought electricity to them that they haven't had until recently. And the day we visited, they were watching the World Cup. They have to put stone foundations under their places where they cook. But they were warm and welcoming people. And one of the things that they also have to do is they put new reeds on top of the island every week because the old ones are decomposing underneath, under the water. And they also told us that the children now have to go to school. So the kids are picked up by a motorboat every day and taken into Puno, or one of the towns that's along the lake. Another island is Isla Tequel. Its population is about 350 Quechua-speaking people. They live by the Inca Creed, which means do not steal, do not be idle, and do not lie. There is no police force because of their belief in honesty. All disputes are done in a community meeting that they talk it out, and apparently there were no problems. There are no cars, no donkeys, no llamas. Everything is carried from the jetty, where your boat comes in, up 545 steps to the village at the top. I had a hard time with the 545 steps. They wear hand-woven clothes. The men in the red caps are the ones that are married. A young man who is not married will wear a red and white cap. And the reason that I showed you this loom with this other gentleman who's our guide is that the women weave a belt of their own hair that has been grown since they were born and give it to their fiance. Embroidered on it are the things that they want in the marriage. So they might put a house, they might put 3 children, they might put how many sheep they want. And then the men wear those around their waist when they're going out and that kind of thing. One of the reasons that they do this, and it's so unusual, is that they received World Heritage Site cultural designation because of this custom that they have with the hair belts that they weave. But let's look at another part of tourism. This is Pisac, modern tourism. This is a small colonial town. My grandchildren were thrilled to stop here, and you'll see why in a minute. In 1950, there were 25 million international passengers in the world. One estimate declared that by 2020, there would be 1.6 billion tourists in the world. This did not happen because of COVID-19. If it does not happen, it undermines tourist demand and an enormous loss of national income results to the communities. This happened in Peru. I worry about these people who lived in that town. They don't have anybody to come take their pictures in the last year and a half that we had. And then you would give them money if they did this. And it was explained to us that for the women in particular, this was a way for them to make extra money in a way that they didn't have before mass tourism. They were lovely, they were warm, they were fabulous with the children, and all their income stopped in the last year and a half from this kind of activity. And these 2 little girls with their alpaca who did the same. These are the trinkets. Tourism can promote the trinket size of tourism. A lot of these are made in China, they're not made locally. But I think that myself, as somebody who loves to travel and tour, I think about this all the time and what it does to these people. But it's not all pretend like it was there. We happened upon a real event. It is a real mixture of culture, and I was moved to tears. This is the Virgin del Carmen. It's in Machu Picchu Pueblo, which is at the bottom of the Machu Picchu site. It's the town at the bottom of those switchbacks that Sandy showed you. And there's where the train comes in to take you to Cusco and to other places. But the Virgin del Carmen is the patroness of the mestizos, and her feast day is July 15th and 16th. So here we have the church and a local woman who's holding the banner from the church, but you can also see the local people behind her. This is the inside of their church. The statue of the Virgin del Carmen was over on the left-hand side, and she has been moved in a procession out to the street. So the dancers from all of the different villages up in the hills can perform before her. She blesses the faithful, and at the end of the event, there is a war that is waged between the dancing groups and the victorious triumph over the demons. Good overcomes evil, and the Virgin is returned to the church. I love these two pictures. These are people that are not dressed up for tourists. These are people that are doing this because this is an important holy day for them. And it's a mixture of traditions, from the native dances to the Catholicism that was brought in by the Spanish. And then this shocked me. These are dead baby mamas on the back of this one group. A sacrifice they're making for the Virgin. It was still kind of shocking to me and to my children, but it was authentic and really, oh, my water. Yeah. Sorry, but I wanted to show you all the different impacts of tourism on this culture. Here's my bunch. All waiting for the camera. We're with the great Inca and his helpers that helped take us on a tour of Cusco, which was very touristy also, but I can tell you, my children learned a lot. We love Peru. There's so much to learn. The culture is so deep. The mixture of the two cultures and all of the older cultures is very important. And I encourage you to go to the exhibit, and when we can travel again, maybe go to Peru. So, what is the source of dyes? Traditionally would have been plants and some rock mineral.
The real red is from
Cochineal.
bugs.
Yeah, cochineal bugs.
Yeah.
If you go down to Indian Keys to take the boat out, they're growing cochineal out
Oh,
there.
really?
And if you're on a date with your lounge, you can swish one of them, this red dye.
Yeah.
So a lot of plants and everything. What temperature do? What temperature? Temperature.
It depends on elevation. If you're down by the coast, it's warmer. There were people surfing. It was cold.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Lake Titicaca is cold. We were
Yeah.
Well, so it's about custom. Cusco is 11,000 feet, but the mountains around are about 22, 23,000 feet.
Yeah.
Because that, when the big one here, they're 14.
And Machu Picchu is below Cusco. Yes.
Oh my gosh.
Yes. So you got Lake Titicaca, Cusco, and you've got Machu Picchu and elevation and then down.
Take train down with the go when we went next door. And it's fabulous. Check from Cusco. The other thing I'd say, never be fascinated us for 2 days. The fact that all of that stonework was made before metal.
Yes.
And it is amazing how
obsidian?
You can use obsidian to wear rather quickly. Obsidian is better for things like putting off heads and not hearts. But hard stone on hard stone is what you need. So it's rubbing. So you would take a similar stone to a stone and rub. Because obsidian, it would break up too fast. Yeah.
The other thing that impressed me was the importance of the potato. Now, think about it. Potatoes are universal now.
Yeah.
And supposedly it was for great Europe, and potatoes certainly fit Ireland. But they also they use a kind of freeze-dried milk. Potatoes are often this is what happened here. They're left in the field, and it's freeze-dried. Because during the day, temperature warms up, they dry it, it gets colder, that is it.
Yep. And I love the colors and the tiny
Yes,
size.
yeah, fantastic.
I mean, you have to get to Luther Burbank, who designed 800 different plants, but he came up with like 40 potatoes, including the russet, which he designed for Ireland. It's light free. So is everybody here going on Wednesday? Not everybody, but most of you are. It's going to be fun. Nancy and all have been. I've been. Anyone else been yet? I mean, were you blown away? Back to the show. Yeah.
I mean, the gold and everything is not just the income, it's all the other colors as well. But the virtual reality,
Yeah.
is really is
Yeah.
It was great.
And Jade and I meant to say that if you are in Madrid, Spain, go to the Museum of the Americas in Madrid, because it is filled with more of the gold from Peru and from all of the other cultures. I mean, it didn't come back to this exhibit, and it's a bit of a walk to get to it from downtown Madrid, but oh my gosh, if anybody here been to that museum? It's fantastic. I mean, Madrid has wonderful, wonderful, wonderful stuff. A lot of churches. The only bad thing about Madrid is after 4 days, we only found one church with real candles. All the others had push button tea lights, and we know God pays no attention to those. And then when we found where we could get the candle in the churches, a Coke machine. You dropped in a €2 coin, pushed a button, and out came a candle that you could take out wine. So strange stuff.
It's a beautiful city though.
It's a beautiful city, and the Museum of the Americas is worth a special trip.
You know what's going on in North Museum? They have some exhibit. That's one.
They've got a new season,
Another one? Or
it's not on this.
It's Frida Kahlo.
Frida Kahlo, Mexico.
Oh,
yeah.
Yeah. And it's food.
And then what's ironic is next week, the British Museum is opening in Peru as well, so it's kind of like the time to do. But this exhibit is up until March, so you have a chance to go, and then you have a chance to go again.
Everyone is here, it's like Paris.
Yeah, it's going all the way around the world.
Exactly.
I do not, are you going with
It's
me?
March.
You'll, they've got, I think it's the 15th of March, something like that.
It really is an excellent.
Anybody have questions for Jane? She needs to, fly. It's 12:30, it's lunchtime.
Yeah, we went, you went in 2018.
Yes.
Irene and I went in 2016. And this town here is called Aguas Calientes, warm water.
Yes.
It has natural hot springs. And actually, it's a great, I don't know if you and your family were able to do it. There's, it kind of cascades down 4 major pools, and they each get gradually cooler. One's very, very hot, like a sauna, and then it gets gradually cooler. But in that town too, we ate, and it was the only time we ate it in Peru, was alpaca. They serve alpaca steaks with this mushroom gravy over it. Oh. And I would echo what Jade said. Never been a Peruvian who hasn't liked a potato. I mean, and my wife, and it's very typical with Peruvian cuisine, has no problem with mashed potatoes and rice being on the same plate. I often say Peruvians never seen a carbohydrate they don't like. You know? So it's very normal for them to eat potatoes and rice. And I'm wondering, I guess rice was brought from Europe or from Asia, and then the potato would have been indigenous to Peru.
Rice was brought in from West Africa to feed the slaves and then gradually expanded down, which is why Georgia and Florida and South Carolina had such huge rice plantations. And then they found other areas that they could grow it and it became a major food crop.
So like for my wife Irene, she always says it's not a meal unless it has rice. I mean, that's a staple. Kristen and then Jane.
I had a question about the wheat. We're amazed at different sized corn. Derived corn that we got in Peru.
Right, the choclo. Is choclo indigenous, the large
No,
kernel?
corn is indigenous to Mexico. That's where it developed about 5,000 BC. And it gradually spread. And you can see archaeologically the growth and development. Climate, elevation, soil. It's why we have, in the States, we have silver queen, we have a sweet corn, we have popcorn, we have Indian corn, all of these different kinds that are developed to meet the needs and places.
I was going to say that I've been to every place in Latin America, that Peru has the most diverse cuisine. It is very, I mean, don't go there in Mexico. It has such a, has had such a from the very large Chinese population. And others, but it is very different and it's very good.
Thank you, Jane.
So salad.
Oh, yes. Yes, definitely.
Just want to talk about corn. There's one thing, they had a picture of it, so I should have. Yeah, Moire, I think it's called, was the agricultural experiment station.
Yes.
Now, at each one of these levels, they had a microclimate.
That's amazing.
And because of the sun didn't go every way, it's different outside, different altitude, and you've got water different. And they used to experiment with all these different kinds of crops that they could grow.
We think we have advanced intelligence.
Yeah.
Right, that was definitely one of my favorite places on the tour. It's amazing. And the salt mines, and I don't know if that was Jane's or your presentation.
Yeah.
But the salt mines, you saw them boxed, you know, in little squares. Each family owns those squares, and those are inherited. They mine their own salt by family. And literally it's passed down to generations, each of those little pools out of which the salt is mined. Fascinating. We brought home pink salt. We brought home 3 or 4 different types of salt from the salt mines. And like Jane's son, we loved it too. I think we used it up real quick.
We also found fascinating that in Machu Picchu, they developed such an advanced and amazing system of storage of food in order to feed all of the people far and wide. And they had this amazing storage and capacity to evaluate how much they had and how much went where. And it was
that's
started.
another reason.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then just think about rodent control.
Yes.
And stuff like that, you can get into it, or wet and, you know, rusts and blights that can get in your grains and things. It's rather amazing.
Fortunately, they had a lot of temperature and elevation to help.
Yes.
With that.
Yeah.
I was there the year that you and I were, I don't know if you're still doing it, but from the train station with the zigzag going down, about halfway down, the bus stopped and this armed bandits got on board.
Oh.
And then, you know, you had that experience, right? And then they got up. I don't know.
Habían bandidos en nuestra.
Is this performance art?
Yes.
Oh.
Oh,
And the
yeah,
bus
sorry,
coming
that's
from-
even harder.
Yeah, that is an important part.
So I know they still do it. because-
We had no idea.
Jay mentioned the fact that, you know, we're talking about this, how it is, it wasn't put on for tourists, this is different also, but one of the things that struck me in the whole Sacred Valley there is these terrace farms are still all around the whole valley, and they still farm there, they still have their local markets, they look just like that,
No,
and it's not for tourists, this is just them living their life, the same way they did 500 years ago. No machine up there on these terraces, they're growing.
One of our tour guides, it's just amazing, you can tell just how close the culture is to the earth. I mean, they, you know, what we would say is sort of a hyper environmentalist. Those folks are just that naturally, you know, they're very, very connected to the earth. It's incredible.
I forgot what I was gonna say.
You're talking about the eagles. When we went in 1921, we were encouraged to go, we invited to us by the then Canadian ambassador. We've been our best friends who lived in Convent. And the government insisted that we travel with our guards. And there were 6 of us. There were us and some friends that are Canadian friends. And so there were 6 people that were gentlemen, not females. Was a very large man. Was had actually been directed by the Green Bay. And guards like to guard him more than anything. Now, I don't know if it was because of his size or what. And our friend Tony would wander off and do his own thing. The guards were quite unconcerned.
My guess would be the early 1970s, the Shining Path rebels would have still been there. I mean, they still exist, but in the early 70s, they would have been very.
Right, and remember, there was
powerful.
the embassy, and our friends who were prisoners, that she was being offered as soon as we heard about it. She was coming at the council, that she was coming home, and our friend Tony turned out to be one of the 3 negotiators with them. He went back into there a number of times into the embassy, and he was the only one that actually lived in Lima. The others were the head of the Red Cross and the Archbishop of Ayacucho. And twice at least during those negotiations, he was so threatened that he
David asked a question about trade, and I probably should have brought it up. Trade going back a very long time. The only place in the world that you can find absolutely pure copper on the surface of the earth is the Upper Peninsula of Michigan and Isle Royale in Lake Superior. Along with cotton, Columbus was given 2 small copper wells when he got to the Bahamas, the copper trade. And copper has been found pre-Columbian in Tierra del Fuego. So copper was moving up and down all over the area. Obsidian has been found up in Canada. Obsidian has been found everywhere. It was an incredible trade system based on canoe trade and overland trade that ran from Canada all the way down to the tip of South America. Feathers and bone and wampum and gold and silver and all kinds of mother of pearl and things like that. So yes, all of these people traded with each other, which of course is how disease made it into the Inca before the Spanish did.
Well, thank you again, Sandy. More than Kristen has circulated an email just with some good information for those of us who will be going to the museum tour. Parking, I think parking was the biggest issue. I think they're suggesting what Meisner Park, the parking garages, there are 4
Yeah.
parking garages. Parking garage A at Meisner Park is the closest one to the museum. There's probably other street side parking, but I know Irene and I are going with the Meisner Park, parking garage A.
Well, they're limited to 2 hours.